Hi, everybody. My name is Emily Ramshaw, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of the 19th. And I'm so thrilled to be with all of you today for this 19th Represents Future of the Workforce event. I want to tell you all that we have been in operation now for about 3 years, but this is the first live in-person event we've gotten to put on in our hometown of Austin. So this is really special to us for so many reasons, and it's amazing to have a crowd like this and to be covering a topic that's so important for us in this moment in history. So since 2020, the pandemic, the work from home revolution, we have all really experienced rapid technological and societal changes that have completely upended the way we work. The 19th was supposed to be an in-person newsroom. Just for an example, we're in 16 states right now. So we are here today with you to dive deep into the future of the workforce. How have the past few years changed the lives and livelihoods of workers across industries? And are these changes here to stay? What will it take to prepare the next generation for the jobs of the future and to ensure greater gender and racial equity in the American workforce? So we're going to be joined today by an incredible lineup of business leaders, of policymakers, of experts on workplace culture, all of whom are thinking deeply about labor, emerging technologies, and the way we work. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our founding sponsor, Indeed, our supporting sponsor, Notley, and our media partner, my alma mater, the Texas Tribune. Thank you to all of our sponsors today. And just a quick reminder that's important to say, while sponsors help keep the 19th events free for our readers and our viewers to attend, they play no part in the programming of the conversations. That's all us and our newsroom. All right, we are going to get into today's program, which we hope you will share online in real time using the hashtags 19th Represents or the 19th ATX. And now to kick off our first conversation, I'd like to invite our editor-at-large, 19th star and MSNBC star, Erin Haynes, and a very special panel to the stage. Erin, come on up.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so thrilled to be here in Austin. I am thrilled to be here with two women who have their fingers on the pulse of people and really the culture of work, who help us to sound smarter at the 19th and who help us to empower all of you in our audience. So joining us to talk about how to rewrite our relationship with work, we have on my far left, Tiffany Dufu, who is the author of Drop the Ball, Achieving More by Doing Less, and the founder and CEO of The Crew, which is a peer coaching and professional development organization for women. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you for having me.
And Anne Helen Peterson, who is a journalist who first wrote about millennial burnout in 2019. Wow, the Wayback Machine. She's also the author of Can't Even, How Millennials Became the Burnout Generation, and co-author of Out of Office, The Big Problem and Bigger Promise of Working from Home. Welcome, Anne Helen.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for joining us today, because I just really want us to have an empowering conversation that really reflects on the lessons of the last 3 years, frankly, and that helps folks in this room, helps folks watching, helps us all continue to imagine what our new normal is going to be, which is going to look different for all of us based on our diverse lived experiences and circumstances, right? But being here in community with all of you together, having this conversation in an inclusive and really empathetic way, and an honest way that feels very urgent and important to me, and I know to both of you. So I just want to thank everybody who was able to show up today. But I also want to acknowledge the people who were not able to be here, and to say to them that we see them as well, and that we continue to do this work for them and with their stories in mind. And so with that, let's get started. I want to start by just really asking both of you how you see women, how you see people of color, other marginalized folks really rethinking their relationship with work now. And Tiffany, I'll start with you, and then we'll come to Anne Helen.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's just a pleasure to be here. I spend most of my time focused on women and girls. My life's work is advancing women and girls. That's pretty much why I'm on the planet. And right now at The Crew, we're very focused on mid-career women, in large part because companies are recruiting talent, onboarding them. By the time women get to the very senior levels, we can't afford to lose them, but there's this leaky pipeline in the middle, and we're trying to figure out how do we ensure that they get the support that they need in order for them to thrive and in order for us to really maximize and unleash their potential. There are three things that we are noticing at The Crew that this woman in the middle really needs in order for her to feel like it's worth it in this new environment. The first thing that she's looking for her employer is meaning. Everyone's on a quest to live a purposeful life. And now we are expecting that when we come to work, we will be doing work that brings us joy, but also that really taps into our deepest purpose.
Yeah.
The second thing that she's looking for is advancement, not just a promotion or more money, but she's looking for advancement of herself. And she's looking for evidenced evolution of the self. I need to feel like I'm really growing, that I'm really learning in a way that she used to get outside of the workplace, but now you have to get that inside of the workplace as well. And the third thing is integration, and not just flexible work integration or hybrid work integration. I'm talking about, I want to work for an employer that values and acknowledges all of the different parts of my life. I want them to appreciate and value me as a holistic being, not just for the part of me that I bring in the door that attributes to their bottom line, but the part of me that attributes to my bottom line. And it's a very tall order, I must say, and a lot of expectations that are now put on employers, in part because, and Anne does such a great job of really researching what's happening in our culture and the decline of community. People are looking for community now from work, but those are the ways in which the crew is trying to support companies in meeting those desires and meeting those needs through our platform.
Absolutely. What would you add to that?
Well, I think that some things that people in marginalized identities broadly knew before the pandemic to be true about the office, aka that it was a very white space, that it was a very masculine space, that it was a very neurotypical space. That's just become very, very clear, right? And there are reasons why, if you look at data from like Slack's Future Forum, that while people were working remotely or in a hybrid fashion, that sense of belonging, particularly amongst employees of color, went up, right? That's the opposite of what you would think in terms of how office culture would work, right? But if you allow people to not be in the office all the time, they actually feel like they belong in their office culture more. So, and we're also seeing just in general with women, incredible desire for the flexibility, both in terms of where they work, but also when they work. So we get this, companies are trying to get on board with this in some sort of way, trying to figure out a hybrid idea, but they are not doing the second step, which is trying to protect against presenteeism, right? Because the people who are going to continue to go into the office are those people who have never felt excluded from the office, right? Who maybe their caregiving responsibilities mean that they can always be in the office. They love the office, right? Like no one loves the office like a white dude without caregiving responsibilities. And so how do you protect against a pretty natural human inclination, which is that if you see more of a person in the office, you think, oh, they're working more, right? So how do you do that? And that's what I think this is the second step that we're grappling with now. And some companies are really aware of it, but they're not doing anything about it yet. So how do you, and one of the ways you can do it is you can have people who aren't white dudes as management, right? But that's, again, another struggle that a lot of companies still haven't done enough with, is how do we get people into these higher levels so that they too can kind of push back against the monoculture of an office.
Can I co-sign
Absolutely.
on that? It's just so great. I think the other piece is those individuals who are at home, supporting them with creating the kind of boundaries and the structures that they need so that their work is not just bleeding into all of the different parts of their lives. Because just because I'm at home doesn't mean that when I'm not working for you, I don't have a ton of work to do. And so part of the challenge for a lot of women, especially who have those caregiving responsibilities, is they appreciate the flexibility, but they don't want that to mean that they're on all the time, that they're on 24/7. And so really supporting individuals with, how do I create the boundaries inside of my home? In some ways I've been successful, but in other ways I have not. And in fact, I actually leave my home now because it's the only place where I can be called anything other than hun and babe and mom, because I was struggling to figure that out. So I think there's both and.
Yeah, Tiffany, I actually know this because we've had a conversation about this before, but I wonder if you can share it with the audience. Your trick with the shoes to let your family know what time it is.
Tell you about that?
About the kind of work that you are doing.
Yes, I found at the top of the pandemic that one of the dynamics in my home was I realized I used to leave to go to work, which basically meant that when I was at home, I was accessible and I was available. But all of a sudden, the pandemic hit. I'm now working in my home, and it was so difficult to get my family to understand. I know you see me, but I am unavailable. And so I did. I came up with this slipper strategy where one pair of slippers was I am founder and CEO of the crew. Right now, I'm unavailable to you. I had another pair of slippers that was the wife and mom slippers. I can make your quesadilla. I can sew your Girl Scout patches onto the thing. And then there was another that I had to come up with were my slippers for this is me time. I just need to sit and read my novel and drink my tea. And so still, when I walk out of the room, my family kind of looks down at my feet first to find out who is walking out of the room right now and is she available to me?
I thought you were going to say that you put on heels at
No,
home.
No, that's just for you all.
Right. I was going to say that's just for today, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so look, I mean, what both of you were saying, representation matters, lived experience matters. Raise of hands, how much of what these two are saying is really resonating with a lot of you out here right now? Yeah, exactly. I thought maybe that would be the case. And Helen, you kind of started talking about this. I just want to follow up with both of you on this question too. The big lessons that employers are learning and what they are still not getting as we are beginning to rethink folks' relationship with work.
I think that they've learned that work can be done.
And before we close, we'd just like to thank again our founding sponsor, Indeed, our supporting sponsor, Notley, and our media partner, the Texas Tribune. Thank you all for making today possible. And finally, to our members in the room, we are so glad that you're here. We're so grateful for your support of our events and our journalism and our mission. If you are not already a member, this is my pitch, y'all, you need to become a member. You can do that by making a gift of any size at 19thnews.org/membership.
The polling shows that CEOs still think that their workers aren't being very productive, right? There is not that trust in their workers that they're doing the work. And part of that, some of those numbers came out before the most recent numbers about productivity going slightly down over this past year. You might have seen those. But I don't think that's about workers being like, I'm lazy. I'm not going to do my work anymore,
quitting.
right? Like quiet quitting, aka doing your job as described in your job description. But I think it's that these employers have not been attentive to the long-standing effects of burnout, right? Like what happened over the past 2 years? People made it work because they had to make it work. They worked really hard. And then like most people that I know, it wasn't the first year of the pandemic that was the hardest. It was last year.
Yeah.
Right? And it's now. And so how do you grapple with that? I was speaking at a conference of HR professionals last week, and all of them said, we can't wait for a sabbatical, even if we had a sabbatical program, right? Because we have done nothing as an organization, people are taking mental health leave. They are forcing a sabbatical on the company, and that is costing more catastrophe than it would have been if we just tried to figure out how to grapple with this issue. So I think companies are not dealing with that, and now they're switching gears into a precarity mindset, and you're going to have the same problems.
Yeah, there are a couple of lessons that we're learning at the crew. We're very focused on data. When employees, members join the crew, the first thing that they do is upload what they want to realize in their life, their goals, and we support them through accountability circles, which is why we're called the crew. But one of the things that I've been noticing in terms of the trend is that one of the categories that's uploaded in terms of what women want, obviously, is finding a new job. And sometimes our corporate partners are very, concerned about the fact that we onboarded them and then she uploaded that she wanted to find a new job. When you look deeper at the data, it's not necessarily that she wants to find a new company or a place of employment. What's happening is that she doesn't want to work typically for the manager that she's working for. And it's much easier to navigate the politics of just going outside of your company to find a new opportunity than it is to actually navigate the politics of how do you find a new opportunity within your organization? So one of the things I wish employers could really understand and get is that communicating to her your allegiance to her ambition, to her growth, to her career trajectory, above and beyond the team that she's actually on, and finding ways of transparently allowing people to experience different teams and different opportunities will allow you to retain the talent because it's typically that's the issue. The second thing that we've seen is that when under the career category, when women are uploading, I want to define a goal that advances my career, the highest rated category is completing a project at work. About 30 something percent of the goals that are uploaded are related to completing some kind of project at work. Only 8% of the goals that are uploaded are related to expanding my network, which includes finding a mentor, finding a sponsor. And one of the things I find fascinating about that is that anyone who is employed knows the value and the importance of who you surround yourself with, who knows about your work, who's talking about your work, who you're connected and related to in order for you to expand. And yet so few of our mid-career women are specifically creating strategies and identifying opportunities for her to expand her community and her network as a part of the work
Yeah.
of the job in order
because
for
that is
her to
definitely- that's
exceed. And
definitely
I wish that more employers would provide opportunities for her to do that, not as an extracurricular activity,
Right.
but as an actual function of her job.
Right. And demystifying that
That's it.
for them as well.
That's it.
So, I mean, look, I spoke to this at the top of this conversation, but really, yes, it is a privilege. I think we all recognize for us to be able to be here at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday. We know that there are folks that are in our workforce in this country that are not able to do that. And so I want to ask about what we need to understand as a society about equity in terms of people's ability to reimagine and rewrite their relationship to work. What are some of the barriers to that, even now?
I think when you have an unsustainable relationship with work, it narrows your focus to just me and mine, right? Like when you are scared in your workplace that you're going to lose your job at any second, if you are just like incredibly like all that matters in life is your job, just focus on the individual constantly, that aperture just continues to close. You don't care about community, you don't care about the larger community, right? So like outside of your own neighborhood, but actually what's happening in the city level, the state level, the national and global level. And it's a lot harder to feel that solidarity with other workers whose jobs are not like yours. And so I think when you create a situation where you're not constantly thinking about work all the time, makes it a lot easier to form those connections that make, making work sustainable for everyone, no matter what type of work that they do, top of the list, right? Not just for me, not just for people like me, but for people in doing all sorts of types of work. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that sometimes we don't really think about is our privilege and our responsibility in relationship to our workforce and workplace opportunities. We think about it in terms of our identity. I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm middle class, I'm college educated, but my ability to have a lot of agency over my calendar, for example, or my ability to be able to create a workplace and an environment where hopefully everyone can bring their full selves to the table is power. And so I think it's really important for all of us who are in positions of power in that way to leverage that in order to support people who don't necessarily have control over their schedules. I think the other piece is to just learn that culturally, different people have a different relationship to work. I stand on the shoulders of a lot of women who have always worked. It is not something that's incongruent with me being a phenomenal mother because me being an amazing mom is in part me securing financial freedom and providing economic opportunity for my children. It's something that I've had the privilege of aligning with my passion and my purpose and why I'm here. And I think that really not thinking of it as a zero-sum game, but understanding that people bring a cultural lens, they bring a historic lens, all of the context that people bring to work can be leveraged to both inspire and motivate them, and also to support them in providing opportunities for others.
Yeah. You brought up one of the magic words that I was certainly going to address. So thank you for teeing this up, Tiffany. The idea, the 19th is certainly a workplace where we encourage people to bring their lived experience to work. That is something that a lot of workplaces have begun to do, especially I feel like in the last 3 years. The idea of bringing one's lived experience to work How do you see that as being a helpful thing for employees? Is it potentially a harmful thing to ask employees to bring their full lived experience to work? I wonder what thoughts both of you have on the idea of lived experience at work and bringing your full self to work.
You want me to go? You want to
You
go?
go first.
I think everyone should have the right to bring whatever they want to bring.
Yeah.
To the workplace. First of all, if I don't want to bring my full self to the table, I shouldn't have to bring my full self to the table. So whatever spaces you open up for people to share, for people to be vulnerable, I think it's really important that we provide as much aperture as possible for people to bow out. I'm sensitive to this because I have one of our former team members just sitting right here, Morgan Franklin, and at our weekly all hands, I start with a question to the team. And I've had to learn that regardless of the question, I should frame it in such a way that it doesn't have to be a personal question. That I'm starting with, share a person who inspires you or share a person who was just inspirational. Right? So that people can choose how much they want to bring of themselves to the table. But I think the more important piece is that we don't decide which parts of people they should or should not bring to the table. I think that we all have a multitude of identities. I mentioned some of mine in being a woman. I'm a cisgen woman, in being a Black person, but I'm also an able-bodied person. I'm also a person who, and we don't talk about fertility privilege, but I have fertility privilege, which for a lot of women impacts their livelihood and their experience in the workplace. I'm someone who has a body privilege. I have a small frame. People make assumptions. People have stereotypes and biases depending upon how you physically show up, which is another reason why the virtual world is actually really amazing, especially for all of the women who don't have to reveal that they're expecting because nobody can see below the camera. And so what I think is really difficult is when I walk into a space or I appear in a space and people assume the parts of me that I should be bringing to the table when all of them actually inform my experience. And that's where I believe the evolution really can take hold.
Yeah. I love the option of bringing my full self, but you are not entitled to my full self at work.
Yeah.
What were you going to add?
I mean, I think I heard when bringing your full self to work became part of like the lexicon, I heard a lot of people who were like, you don't want my full self. You're not ready. Or I brought my full self to work and my manager had a conversation with me about that. Right?
Maybe bring 67%.
Yeah, exactly. Like, don't bring your anger, don't bring your frustration. Like, bring your full self as in terms, like, we want to hear your vulnerability, but we don't want to hear the things that are aggressive in some way or coded as aggressive because of the way that you frame them, the body that they're coming from, all of these different things, right? Especially, I think, anytime these complaints, valid criticisms come from people who are expected to be more supportive or docile in the workplace, like it's a difficult position. And so I think that there is real value in learning to protect parts of yourself from the workplace, because oftentimes when you make yourself vulnerable to the workplace, that means that you are vulnerable to exploitation by the workplace. And I think something that a lot of people, particularly people doing passion work in any way, shape, or form, anything that could be called a calling or vocation, have been trying to actually make themselves less vulnerable in the workplace. And you could call that boundaries, or you could just say that it's trying to create a situation where you are less manipulated by the workplace and feel more in control of the work that you're doing and why.
Well, I'm also really curious about a big question that each of you asked yourselves regarding your relationship to work in the last 3 years.
Do you want to go? I have kind of an answer. Like a lot of people, before the pandemic, I was doing a lot and then suddenly was doing a lot less and felt great about it, right? It was like, how did I travel all the time? Why did I travel all the time? It feels very good to be present. And then as we are still in the pandemic, but traveling a little bit more, doing a little bit more. And I've come to understand, and I think a useful frame for me is to think about arranging my work in terms of seasons, right? Kind of not necessarily in alignment with the school year or anything like that, but more like, okay, so I'm in a busy season right now, but then I'm going to go into a less busy, a more restorative season. Because the thing that I think is really responsible for burnout is you never get a feeling of catharsis. You never get a feeling of completion. You never finish taking the finals or finish the marathon. You're just running another marathon all like right away, right? Or another final forever and ever. And so trying to really build in those periods of restoration and of presence and staying put and of less intense work has been important. And not everyone can have that control over their schedule, but having a little bit of my own and thinking about it that way has been useful for me.
I think the question for me was really about being honest with myself about the ways that I was working before, whether or not those were necessary ways or stories that I had told myself about the way it had to be, and whether or not I was going to use this as an opportunity to realign. Probably the two biggest areas were time with other people. I used to feel that I needed to spend quite a bit of time expanding my community, supporting my community, which meant physically showing up, physically being present. And all of a sudden, I found myself when I wasn't attending all of those events, when I wasn't commuting to just meet one person for tea for like 40 minutes and then spending a longer time on the commute back home, that it just wasn't necessary. And I have to say, interestingly enough, it caused me to really think more strategically about whose time I should be focused on with in-person experiences. And so the threshold for me doing something in person became much higher. And then the other thing I had to really be honest about was, Tiffany, are you really doing all of this all of the time because your passion is advancing women and girls? Or are you just a workaholic?
Yeah.
Because while everybody else was taking the extra time to do yoga and doing all that, I was like I was still working. And so I think that those are some of the questions that I had to grapple with.
Okay. Well, as I just want a final thought I want to leave with those of us who are here in the audience and tuning in, and that is, what is a big question for anybody out there today to ask themselves, just to get this conversation going about what they think about in terms of what this means in their own lives, rewriting their relationship to work? What is a big question that can spark that thought for them?
I have one. Go. My parents taught me that if you want something you've never had before, you're going to have to do something you've never done before in order to get it. They like drilled that into me, that if you're in your comfort zone, Tiffany, you are likely not going to create any kind of breakthrough. And so the one question that I would really encourage people to ask is, what am I doing today? What am I doing tomorrow? What am I doing next week that I've never done before in order to advance myself in the workplace or anyone else whose life I might touch?
So if you're in this room, I think chances are high that you are a person who has really pushed yourself a lot for a lot of your life and also wanted to be the best in some way.
No.
I never. And
You're like, who, me?
a reader on Instagram actually suggested something that her therapist had passed on to her, because like a lot of people, she spent all of her time in therapy talking about her job. And the therapist said, what if you thought not about how can I be the best at work, and that be always the thing that I'm thinking about, always driving me, always making me feel like I'm inadequate. What would it take for you to be happy at work? And what would happen if you reorient your goal around being happy instead of being the best? And I think that is just something to put in your head and let just hang out in there just for a little bit. What would that look like for you to be happy in your work? And how can you disarticulate happiness from the best? So that's what I'm thinking about.
Shout out to our therapists. All right. Well, unfortunately, this is where we have to leave it, but thank you so much, Tiffany and Anne, for joining us today.
good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julia Beechan. I'm the editor-in-chief here at the 19th. And when I say here, I really mean distributed across the country, because I am not actually based in Austin. But in this moment in time, we are all here together, which is such a wonderful moment. So next, we are talking about the workforce, how the workforce needs to adapt to meet the demands of the future. As technology evolves and the global economy shifts, many people in traditional industries in the US have been left without solid career paths. We heard a little bit about career trajectories in the last panel. So we're going to dive a little deeper. Today, joining us to talk about workforce development, education, and training are Katie Corrigan, a senior advisor at the AFL-CIO Technology Institute, which is the think tank for labor union organization representing over 12 million workers. Katie focuses on how to ready workers for a rapidly changing economy. Welcome, Katie. Next to Katie, we have Blair Corcoran de Castillo, Director of the Innovation and Design Studio at Opportunity at Work, an organization that connects overlooked communities with technology jobs. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And Melanie Flowers at the end here, the Vice President of Industry Partnerships at Pathful Inc., a college and career readiness organization. She's worked in technical training and workforce development here in Austin, local, for over 20 years. Thanks for being here, Melanie. All right. So let's start with you, Blair. You work at Opportunity at Work, and that's a real perfect place for us to start today. So help us set the stage. What are some of the emerging opportunities you see for the workforce today?
That's awesome. Thanks so much for having me. So at Opportunity at Work, we start with the current workforce and understanding it as we think about the emerging opportunities. So Opportunity at Work's mission is to increase economic mobility for STARS, and STARS is an acronym that we use to represent the talented workers who are skilled through alternative routes instead of a bachelor's degree. So these are folks who have built their skills through community college, workforce development programs, military, and on the job. They just don't have a four-year college degree. And what we've seen in the past 2 to 3 decades is that employers have increasingly put degree requirements on their job descriptions, which has basically left a whole generation of workers without access to family-sustaining wages. A lot of those jobs haven't changed from what they were before, but they've placed this degree requirement, which has become a barrier. In fact, today, 70% of new roles actually require a degree. And what most folks don't realize is that more than half of the current workforce are STARS. They don't have degrees. And so there's a real mismatch between the 70% of degree requirements with the 50% of workers that have them or who don't. And so what we're doing is we're working with employers to build the business case and also the infrastructure to help them implement inclusive skills-based hiring practices. And I think that that's really where there is emerging opportunity, helping workers understand their skills and helping them understand how to translate that to the jobs that they want in the lives and the careers that they deserve.
Thank you. So Katie, when we talk about getting workers ready for a rapidly changing economy, what are some ways you see that happening successfully?
Great. Well, first I did want to pause because many of you may or may not know what the acronym AFL-CIO even
yes.
means. That's one thing that we're doing at the AFL-CIO is explaining ourselves a lot more clearly. Essentially, that's the Federation of America's Labor Unions. So we represent everyone from women's soccer players and more recently MLB baseball players, all the way to steel workers and auto workers and everything in between. So when we think about the workforce, we're really thinking broadly. So 2 things, I think, in terms of getting workers prepared for what's to come. One, technology. One reason why the Technology Institute was created at the AFL-CIO several years ago was a result of our own future of work process, which said, listen, technology not only is creating new sectors of the economy, it's going to impact the nature of every occupation in the country. And we need to be a lot more sophisticated and look around the corner at what that's going to look like, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's quantum, all these different things. So that's one thing. The second is training. And it's really great to be here with you all who thought so much about that specifically. But first on technology, I think one idea that we have, which I think is an innovation, is that technology shouldn't land in the workplace fully cooked. Workers themselves should be involved in the R&D process as technology is developed, because technology should work for workers, it should work for people, it shouldn't drive us. And when you say it, I have to tell you, a couple years ago when we started talking about this, it was a little bit fantastical. But over the last several years, we have been working with Carnegie Mellon University up in Pittsburgh. For those of you that are from the tech community, every time I go up there, I just get, there's just an incredible amount happening on that campus in every which way around tech. But we're working with professors in the computer science area, professors of engineering, to really figure out what does it look like to bring workers into the R&D process? How do you do that in a smart way, in an effective way? One thing about organized labor is we're organized, so we can actually bring unions to the table that represent nurses, that represent transit, that represent auto, and have that type of sophisticated conversation. And we're doing it. And one thing I'll just flag that we're discovering is very simple. It's kind of a very old notion that work has value, that people have value. So we're doing a study on bus drivers with transit unions and several professors up at CMU. And what we're discovering is driving a bus isn't just driving a bus. You need to have the skill to do that, but you're also doing a lot of other things that are impacting and helping the community, helping that person with a disability make sure they get on the bus, making sure those kids get off at the right stop when they're going to school, dealing with the accident in front of you and the intensity of emotion when people get in an accident, and making sure the police are called. Things like that that take judgment. So how do we suss out how an autonomous vehicle might help with health and safety on the bus itself driving? But all those other things, that's human-centered design. So that's what we're going for on tech. Second thing is on training. And it's just, I think that the conversation on training is so much more developed. I remember when Opportunity at Work started about 10, 12 years ago, and it was a novel idea that guess what, college isn't the only track, that there's a lot of paths to good jobs that have real value for society. And so how do we develop more tracks and invest in them? And by the way, that gives access to a whole lot more people to get good jobs. So in terms of training, and I'll just make a plug, we happen to be sitting in the National Apprenticeship Week. So just to reinforce what we're hearing there, we're really trying to make sure that there aren't just threading the needle of people into apprenticeship programs in specific skilled trades. We really want to create big gateways. One place to do that is in secondary high school, thinking more sophisticated ways about career tech and education, what used to be called voc training. I think in the 90s we got rid of that, but we didn't just get rid of the word, we got rid of a lot of the funding and ideas and development around that type of training. So we're thinking about how do we create a pathway out of high school where, yeah, that career tech education might lead you into a college program, it might lead you into an apprenticeship, it might lead you into a community college, but big pathways, by the way, so that more women, more people of color get access to. So those are the two big things that I think we look at as opportunities. One of the big shifts is we stop looking at technology as a barrier, and we're trying to look at it as an opportunity.
Thanks, Katie. That's actually a great segue over to you, Melanie, because you and I had a quick conversation right before the panel where I was really wanting to suss the barrier, the access might be to this training. So zooming in on this training that Katie was just talking about and the training that we know exists, you mentioned that awareness. It's not just access, it's awareness. And I'd love to hear how you think we should be opening up, how we can be opening up that access and that awareness so that folks can take advantage of these opportunities.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me today. In my work in workforce development, one of the things that I recognized was there's so many programs out there. There's programs, you want to train on something, it exists. You can learn anything you want to learn. The problem is people aren't aware of what's available to them, whether it's locally, whether it's subsidized, or there's just not a lot of awareness there. But there are some limits with workforce boards and local training providers based on their grant funding. They may not always be able to put dollars towards marketing those programs. And so it's word of mouth. So that's a lot slower than, hey, let me make this thing and put it on a commercial. So there's a lot of lack of awareness out there of what is actually available to people. And then when they find out it does exist, they're like, where's this been all my life? And so getting the word out through the K-12 space, through the K-16 space, and letting people know, hey, these training programs are available to you while you're in high school, as soon as you graduate from high school, whether it's an apprenticeship. I actually just left the Texas Workforce Commission talking about apprenticeships and getting, they were giving some awards out. And so it's awareness. I think if people knew what was available and readily available to them, they would take advantage of the programs.
Well, let's pull on this barriers thread for a little bit. I want to go back to you, Melanie, about ways that you've seen folks successfully communicate, give and spread awareness in a way. And then I'd love to hear from the rest of the panel. And I'll throw to Katie and Blair on how we break through on various barriers that you've experienced, you've observed, so that workers can develop the skills and get the training they need.
So some of the barriers that I've seen in the workforce space are, one, you have people that are changing careers. Hey, pandemic, hospitality industry let me down. I'm never going back to that. I want to learn a new skill. What can I do? And they don't know who to go to, right? They don't know where to start. I've been with XYZ company for the last 7 years, and I don't know what to do. I was asking people, where are you from? Where are you from? And I thought this was a local, but there's people from all over the country here. So welcome to Texas, welcome to Austin. But there's workforce boards in every place that you live. I would first connect with the workforce board. They're not allowed to advertise. There's a running joke, and it's really not a joke, that we're the best kept secret in town. But it shouldn't be a secret. There's so many programs available, and they have wraparound services. So if you're a dislocated worker and you got laid off from your job and you need childcare, well, there's childcare that is available to you. Did you know that? Yes. And it's free, right? And there's also, hey, I have 4 mouths to feed and I'm staring at a light bill. I can't just stop for 6 weeks of training. Hey, we have subsidies that can pay you while you learn a new skill to get you a living wage. So a lot of people don't know about these hidden program or systems and wraparound services. Okay, my car got repossessed because I got laid off and I couldn't pay the note for 6 months. Well, did you know we have transit services? You could get an Uber coupon or gift card or whatever to get you to training or to your job. There's so many things out there. I would just recommend getting with your local workforce board, because there are dollars and there are efforts in all of these spaces. Again, they're just a best kept secret in a lot of cases.
Thank you. Blair, let's go to you on successful ways to break through barriers you've experienced.
Yeah, there are 2 that really come to mind. The first is, I mentioned that half of the workforce don't have degrees. So of the 140 million, 70 plus million don't have degrees. And about 35 million of those folks actually have the skills for jobs right now, for higher wage jobs right now. And so their only barrier is the degree requirement. So one, I think, is you could be, reducing degree requirements, and that would help folks. But that would also help those same people not be pushed back into training, because oftentimes employers think that, low wage means no skill, and that's not the case. And so we're pushing a lot of people into training, which makes sometimes training programs crowded, or they can't get into them, which is a barrier. So this would be one way, is, to allow the people who have the skills right now for those high wage jobs to go. I think the other is that we're seeing a lot of communities at the regional level, because that is where the labor market still works. Even as, we have hybrid roles, work together, the workforce systems with the nonprofit systems, trying to kind of create a wayfinding system for folks who are looking for jobs. So workforce system has these opportunities. Well, this nonprofit actually provides coaching and interview support, right? So trying to put together some of those supports so that folks aren't doing it themselves, helping individual workers wayfind so that they're not having to source the internet, of which there are lots of places and things, but like you're saying, there are different eligibility requirements based on your locality, based on your socioeconomic income sometimes. So there are a lot of regions that we're seeing. We're seeing this in Maryland, LA, San Francisco, where organizations are coming together and actually trying to kind of crowdsource their supports so that workers can get the support they need to get into the training programs and then be successful in the jobs.
Great. I just want to echo on the training side so many things that you've said, including things like wraparound services. I think the piece that I'll just add to the puzzle is there are some real structural barriers. I think it's hard to talk about this issue and not recognize that we have 49,000 folks out in California in the University of California system right now on strike. These are graduate assistants, these are PhD doctoral students, these are postdocs. These are the people that are going to make the economy hum in the future. They can't afford their lives. And the stories coming off that strike line are intense. Some people are donating their blood plasma to pay for rent. Like, that's not an investment. We cannot afford to have that many people walking out of their labs, out of their classrooms. So I just wanted to say, I think cost of education, whether that's needing to take off time to take an apprenticeship course, needing to pay for college. I think we saw a lot of young people last week vote on that issue of student debt in the elections. So just the cost alone is a big barrier in terms of either getting the education, affording your life while you're being educated. And the second thing I think are just some intangibles. And this is why I think we've put such a focus on tech. Number one, you've seen in the kind of respect category, and we heard about that on the first panel of like, what does it mean to feel respected on the job? I think two examples. One, Starbucks workers have organized in, I think, 250 Starbucks coffee shops around the country. It was less about wages. I mean, of course, everyone always could do the better wage. It was less about, they even have some education benefits, but it really came down to respect that during the pandemic, they were frontline workers and did not feel like their voices were being heard in terms of the danger. So I think just that tangible thing of like, okay, if you don't have respect for your workers, are you really investing them in this way around training and education? And the second is just Elon Musk. He just got rid of half his workforce last week. He thought they didn't matter, and I think we all know now they did. So I think that just that notion of respect and valuing the work is a required intangible to do training effectively. And then finally, just that the humanity of it. That, again, going back to tech shouldn't be driving us in an Amazon warehouse, in a white-collar job on a computer. Algorithmic management is people are getting from the Amazon workplace floor. Guess what? They just got fired because they weren't meeting their requirements, which was all done through an algorithm. So I think that basic humanity, that basic sense of respect is also required for good training. And just a plug on unions, because how could I not? Unions are about bringing people together to empower them to say, hey, something's going wrong here, and how do we solve it?
Thank you. Imagine Twitter with a union. Who had an hour and 20 minutes until Elon's name was raised? Anyone?
I know. I was glad to be the first.
So I have an audience question for the group. I want to lean in deeply into the solutions some more. We've heard about demystifying support and resources. We heard about evaluating qualifications and how respect shapes up. This question from an attendee here is, what could be or should be different about how we train? So continuing on the training thread, new employees in order to sustain changes going forward. I'll start with you, Melanie.
Ooh, that's my jam. Training is my jam. Before I worked for Pathful, I was the head of technical training for Samsung for 24 years. So training has to be more than just, this is how you do this widget, right? So there has to be a plan for every role. For those of you that own companies, you have to have a plan to train those roles, not only to do the task, but there needs to be some what we call soft skills. I don't know what the new term is, but how do I communicate? How do I make a plan or a strategy for my career? It has to be more than just, this is how you do this thing, right? If more employers got on board with holistic training, if you will, not just this is how you do your job at the moment, maybe there's some advancement training that needs to be made available. People have to see themselves working for your company in the next 2, 3, 5 years. Everybody knows the war for talent is very real right now. And training and giving people a career path and a training plan that supports that career path is essential. And if you want people to stay with your organization, or if you want to stay with the organization, you have to be able to see, you know what, I could learn this. Maybe this is the fork in the road, and maybe I want to go leadership. Maybe I don't. Maybe I want to do this, you know. But having a plan, a training plan that shows your career and the evolution of your career in a company is so important. It's not just what you're doing at the moment. I think if more companies realize that, they'd retain a lot more people.
Thank you, Melanie. Blair?
Yeah, to build off that, I think it's also about talking about skills are the future currency in the labor market, understanding what skills workers have and what skills employers actually need, because I think often that helps design training programs that are effective. And it's on both sides. I think there's kind of a bit of a black box about what skills are actually necessary. I mean, you talked about soft skills. How do you even quantify what soft skills you're good at, right? But there's a lot of investment right now, and because of the war on talent, there's a lot of interest in employers and nonprofits thinking about how to help companies do that. We recently launched a beta version of this dashboard that helps employers and workers understand, using census data of transitions over the past 10 years, what skills do stars have in particular roles, and what skills are employers actually needing for the roles that those stars would be coming into. And it actually does a scatter plot, which helps folks understand, both on the employer side and the star side, where their gaps might be, but also what are the skills I should actually be looking for, to help both sides understand what types of training and investment do we, the employer, need to be investing in as we bring them on the job, versus if I'm the worker thinking about what skills training I need to enhance my ability to do the job. So I think that's absolutely one area. And I think collaboration, a close connection between employers and the workforce is another. I mean, you talked about apprenticeships. Both of you have talked about apprenticeships, and how they're expanding beyond the trades. I think what has to happen now is understanding what it looks like to actually build educational and racial equity in that. What we're hearing from apprentices is that the current system doesn't work. They get the training, but the organizations are not actually set up to support them, and especially from historically excluded groups. So there's a lot of work, and there have been a lot of resources that are coming out actually this week about apprenticeship as just one example. But I think it's, employers have a job to do, and in addition to our training programs, in trying to bridge those two areas so that employers get the talent that they deserve, and workers get the jobs and careers that they deserve.
Yeah, and I think again, I feel like we know so much on training in terms of how to improve it, how to do it. You've exposed the black box of the workforce board system, where there are so many different resources. I guess for me, I would just really plug, and I loved that your job title, which is kind of more of a systems design approach to the workforce system, that you can't think linearly. It's not just like this set of skills into this particular job in this moment. We're heading into a time where technology and innovation is going to be rapidly changing your day-to-day job many times over the course of your career, even if you stayed in one employment with one company. So we have to build a system, I think, that acknowledges that, so that both on that front end, we're getting people, trained up into their first job, but also over the course of a lifetime, that we have a method to both, kind of scale up, scale down, transition into new types of work, all the while with a good job on the other end. Because if we aren't really clear, and that's why I think the kind of labor management discussion around what skills are needed, how do we train, and then how do we make sure that there's a good job on the other end of that pipeline that we can, again, ratchet up and ratchet down and adapt to over the course of a lifetime.
Thank you. All right, final question, round robin, final thoughts. As folks are about to head into an exercise, get really excited. It's going to be a lot of fun. Is there one thing you'd like the audience to consider as they leave here, head back to their jobs, their companies, that you haven't mentioned or I haven't asked about today?
Start on that end.
All right. Start with Katie.
I think that's fair. You've been going first the whole time, so I feel like that's fair. I think what I love about the next session is that it's called Solutions. And I think that we really do need solutions. And I would just invite you to think about who needs to be in the room as we're creating those solutions, because we have created a lot of solutions without everybody needed in the past, and that has come at big consequence.
Who's missing right now? Who's not here?
I love that. And to build off of that, collaboration, I don't think this is something that can be fixed by one organization, one even sector alone. And so how are we thinking about the future of talent management? Whose role is that? I mean, I've been hearing the talent management is the new talent acquisition. So whose role is that anymore? Like there used to be, kind of two sides. And so thinking about collaboration and how to work together, both supply and demand, to make this better.
I agree. What we like to call here locally is our employment ecosystem. That's all of those things that you were talking about. It's government, it's economic development, it's workforce development, it's education, higher education, job seekers, training providers, staffing agencies. Everyone working together defines kind of what that training is and what it should be and how it should keep going. But I would say reach out to your local employment ecosystem and get involved, because what we say as industry, they're listening to. More and more educators are listening. Hey, you're not giving us what we need, right? So they're listening, whether it's colleges, whether it's the K-12 space. They're trying to build in these, that's why you see so many CTE programs and all these things out. But they're getting there. We're just not quite all the way there yet. But so reach out, get involved, because everyone in here can impact the future workforce.
Quick impromptu poll. How many folks here feel like they are tapped into their local workforce ecosystem? Oh, that's fairly revealing. All right. Well, with that, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. Very nice to meet you. Thank you.
Hello, all right. Thank you, Julia, for the introduction. Again, my name is Jayo Miko Makasakit. I'm the Chief People Officer for the 19th News. And thank you all for participating in our solutions wall. I'm definitely going to steal some of that for my own work. But today, we are talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and it is how we can center people in the work that we are doing with intentionality. We're going to start off with some very recent research that speaks to how leaders in orgs are feeling the strain of the new normal when it comes to working with people and their evolving needs. We'll then hear from leaders themselves about how these challenges are presenting in their work and how they're facing these challenges by centering the people themselves in these challenges. Joining us to unpack this, on my very far left, we have Venice Hayes, the Chief Culture, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer at Dell Technologies. We have Dia Campos, the Director of Governmental and Public Affairs at HEB. We have Angela Jackson, founder of Future Forward Industries, a workplace equity consulting organization, to my immediate left. And then right next to her is Christina Janzer. Janzer, did I pronounce that correctly? Christina Janzer, Senior Vice President of Research and Analytics at Slack and the Future Forum. So to get us started, Christina, so the aforementioned research that we were talking about is part of your work with Future Forum, which is a Slack-led initiative research consortium. You all recently released a study in October titled, "Executives Feel the Strain of Leading in the New Normal." Could you briefly walk us through maybe 2 or 3 of the major findings from the study that in particular spoke to the needs of employees in this new normal?
Absolutely. So first of all, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. So yes, the Future Forum is a research consortium that's backed by Slack. And our goal is really to make a future of work that is more flexible, more connected, and more inclusive. And so we conduct research, we engage with executives, all for the purpose of designing a more people-centered and digital-first way of work. And so every quarter we run a survey of over 10,000 desk workers around the world. And in October, the recent findings, I'll highlight just a few things. First of all, executives are really feeling the pressure. They're really struggling right now. We see a decline in overall experience of 15% over the last year. We also see them reporting 40% more work-related stress and anxiety. And because of those feelings, they're tending to revert back to old ways of working. They're tending to go back to the ways that used to work for them, which often is not what worked for many other people. The second thing that we're seeing is a rise in burnout. And so in the US alone, we see that 43% of people report feeling burned out right now. And when you dig into the data a little bit more, you see a lot of inequities. So women are feeling more burned out than men. Younger people are feeling more burned out than older people. And middle managers especially are feeling burned out. And the last thing that I'll highlight is really the importance of flexibility. And we see this in all of the research that we do. And so flexibility, we see that it has improvements in productivity. We see that it's really important for building a more inclusive workplace. And one of the recent findings that is actually a little bit surprising to me is that flexibility actually improves culture. So flexible work policies were cited as the #1 factor in improving company culture over the last couple of years, which I think is actually a little bit surprising.
We saw a lot of nods from some of those findings. Venice and Dia, hearing these findings and working with folks directly in your workplaces, how is this resonating? We'll start with Venice.
This is resonating so much with me. I know we spoke earlier, but flexibility and choice is something that is central to, kind of how we think about our team members and how they experience work. We also, right before the pandemic, had started thinking about work as being more of an outcome, less a time and a place. And so this notion of you have to be sitting in your cube, from 8 to 5 is gone now. It's, get work done wherever you need to get your work done, however you work best. So the flexibility kind of aspect of your findings resonates the most.
Dia, how about you? How's this resonating in your work?
Yeah, in our world at HEB, I'm not sure how many folks in the room are from Texas. I know at my table alone, I think I may have been the only Texan. But at HEB, we're a grocery retailer. So the pandemic was especially challenging for our workforce. So our workforce is about 130,000 strong in Texas. And we're the largest privately held company in Texas. And the vast majority of our employees are in our stores, are in manufacturing and warehousing and transportation and in logistics. And we have maybe 2,000 people at our corporate office. So the impact of workforce issues that stem from COVID are very unique to us. There was not a stop in the workday. There wasn't a disruption in our normal flow of work, other than we had to do it faster, we had to do it better, we had to figure out really, really complex challenges, all while keeping our employees, who we call partners, engaged and resilient and showing up to work and healthy and engaged. So, and that's honestly a struggle that we continue with to this day. We have not had a break. Here in Texas, we had COVID hit, and then we had the great ice storm, which a lot of you from the north would laugh at us because Texas could not handle cold weather for a bit. But that ice storm really impacted our supply chain and continues to exacerbate certain supply chain issues. So in our business, things like supply chain and inflation, they don't just impact the Texas economy and the greater Texas workforce, they impact specifically our workforce in a very unique way. So resiliency and really focusing on mental health of employees and not just flexible work schedules, but everybody in the room, everybody wants to find eggs on the shelf when they need eggs on the shelf. So there's a lot of complications with scheduling and being able to make sure that our employees have a great quality of life. while they are doing the important work for our customers.
And Angela, so you're in the unique position where you're able to work with a number of orgs in your consulting. How are these findings resonating with you?
Well, first of all, I founded Future Forward Strategies, and this was several years ago, just based on employers who are thinking about how do they manage a multi-generational workforce. We've all heard about, the expectations with Gen Z and millennials, and I think what we found with the pandemic is, they wanted a different way of work, and we had a pause, and we realized we all wanted a way to work. And so people are feeling burned out, and especially people in middle management, because those are you're finding Gen X leaders. And so we learned work from baby boomers, right? We might not have liked it, but we put our head down, we did the work, we rose through the ranks. And what we're finding now is like that didn't work for us, right? It never did. And it certainly doesn't work for our new crop of employees who are Gen Z. They're expecting more. So I think what you're finding in middle management is one, reconciling for ourselves, what does work mean for us and how do we do it in a more sustainable way? And then two, how do we learn to manage differently? It's not do as I say anymore. Come in because I said so. People are choosing their options, and their options might not even be work. So I feel like moving forward, this is going to be central to the conversation in terms of business competitiveness, how we're reacting to this, how we're listening to people, and then how we're adjusting our policies and ways of working. And that might mean that some of us need to be retrained and to think about our leadership in a very different way than what's been traditionally rewarded.
So you teed us up perfectly for our next question, which is around listening. How are we listening to folks? We can't get a sense of what our folks need if we're not effectively listening to them. And obviously, especially if you're working in large organizations, you can't listen to everyone at once. And so, Venice, I want to start with you. You work with quite a large organization. And in the various departments, I'm sure the needs of folks vary widely. How does Adele, or how have you approached listening to get a better sense of what people in the work need?
Yep. So at Dell, we've got about 130,000 team members globally. So it's a lot across many different functions. And for us, we think about data, of course, number one, is very, very important, but listening is the most important. And we have a strategy where not only do we listen to our team members on an annual basis to kind of understand their sentiment, but we do regular check-ins. And when I think about each of our people leaders, they're asked to do the same as well. Do regular, frequent check-ins, listen to your people, ask different questions, right? The questions go beyond, have you completed whatever task it is that you needed to complete? The new question is, how are you doing? How can I help? And, you'll hear the first answer and maybe ask that same question again to really get to the core of how are your people doing? Are they feeling burned out? Are they feeling overwhelmed? Especially now where it seems like people wake up in the morning, turn on their computers, and they don't turn them off until they go to bed at night. So we really need to take care of our people, check in on them, make sure they're not overextending themselves, give them the permission, if you will, to disconnect and ask those deeper questions to really get to how they are doing as people versus how they're doing as, employees completing a task.
Now, Dia, I want to ask a similar question, but I'm also interested to hear, since a lot of your role deals with the public and folks outside of your organization, how do you approach listening to the folks that you work with on a daily basis to get the sense of these needs?
Yeah, especially in the community and charitable giving side of the spectrum, really listening to our community partners and our community stakeholders became extremely different during COVID and after COVID. The relationship with our customers changed. One of the things I remember the most about COVID was it was actually we were all at our emergency operations center the day before restaurants closed in San Antonio, Texas. And we had just done the Texas Monthly interview, which the article ended up, on Apple News and everything, when nobody guessed that would happen. But we decided to go to a restaurant, a really great chef in San Antonio, Chef Johnny Hernandez. We walked in and he had just let go of about 300 employees from his large catering business and everything in San Antonio. And we sat there with him, and as a customer of ours, as a colleague of ours, as a friend of ours, the relationship with restaurateurs and local chefs across the state really changed for us. We started listening to them in a different way. It was not just about, oh, we're all foodies, we all love food, and we all love our communities. It's about, how do we help each other? How can we help you? We were under, at that point, tremendous amount of stress in supply chain, being able to get enough food into stores. And so that night, sitting there with Chef Johnny Hernandez, was the beginning of a program where we worked with local chefs in all of the cities that we work in to bring in their prepared foods into our stores. And it really changed that relationship. And it changed the relationship with nonprofits as well, listening in a very different way to organizations that were under a lot of stress. The food banks, I know Feeding Texas is here, the amount of stress to actually feed people, to get enough food into people's homes was immense. And it really changed those relationships forever just by listening to them in a very different way than a very transactional way of, here's a check for the food bank. What people are commonly used to doing, very transactional, became a very, very personal situation.
Wonderful. Coming back to something Venice said earlier around the data and listening through data, Christina, could you connect the dots for us as to how data can help us more effectively center the needs of the people that we work with?
Yeah, I love this question. So yes, I'm a data person, so this is very near and dear to my heart. When you look at the data, it's actually quite astounding. 60% of executives are not involving their employees in their future of work decisions. So they are making decisions without listening to their employees. And so what that means is that they're making decisions that benefit them, right? And what we see a lot is that the executive experience is very different than the employee experience. That's probably obvious. But on a number of issues, they're experiencing the world very differently. And so if you don't listen to your employees, you're going to make the wrong decisions. And I think one thing to note in terms of listening to employees, and I think about this a lot as a researcher, you have to make sure that you're listening to all of your employees. And I think it's really easy to get into the pattern of listening to the loudest people, listening to the majority. Those might be the people who are easiest to get feedback from. But it's important to listen to the most vulnerable and the people who don't have as strong of a voice. And we see so much of the impact of the pandemic and the impact of flexible work being, everyone loves flexibility, but it's had a greater impact on people of color, on mothers, on women in general. And I think it's important to really consider those people when you're making your future of work plans, and you can't do that unless you make sure that you're talking to the right people.
A novel idea, listening to the people.
This, I guess it's obvious.
So Angela, so you advise leaders, and I assume that you give some of that advisory around needing to listen to the needs of employees. How do you get them to do that?
Well, there's a couple things, and just building on your point, it was fascinating. I was working with the CEO of a fast casual restaurant, who I won't name at this time, but what they did for their hourly workers was the first time they had did this is just recently, is that they opened up that they could receive the 401k benefits. And he came to me and he was perplexed because no one had taken advantage of the 401k benefits. And so he thought that's a great benefit. And for him, the CEO of a company who has disposable income, that's amazing. But for someone who's making $11 or $12 an hour, they might want a different benefit. And he hadn't even considered that. He thought he was being generous and he was doing the right thing. He wouldn't even, when we talk about listen, it's not what people tell you, but it's also the data. Like, he didn't even look at the data and say, okay, no one's taking advantage of this. I wonder why. Let me consider this. And so 2 points I would make with CEOs and people that I work with in businesses. One is you listen to things other than verbal. Look at all the data, and we're receiving data every single day. And then the second thing that I think a lot about around this issue of just equity and thinking about different work and how people work is really understanding to make sure that our listening isn't just performative. Because many times when we listen, I advise the CEOs that we work with in C-suites, listen with an action orientation. Because when people keep telling you the same thing that's wrong and nothing changes, that's when they begin checking out. And it's almost worse than listening at all. Because like once I've told you and nothing's happened, that's where the deep like discontent begins to like grow.
So switching gears a little bit, now we've listened, or now we have some strategies for listening. At some point, we're going to have to deliver on some of these things that we're listening to, and we're going to have to meet some of these needs. And so what we've come to find, and what we find in our work at the 19th, is we can't always rely on best practice. Or the way we've always been doing things, even when we know what the issues are. And as the research has said, this is a different world that we're approaching. So we're going to have to find novel ways of approaching it. So switching to Angela, actually, what I love about your work the most, and what I've read about it, is that you would advise, or you advise leaders to bring an equity lens to business decisions. How have you made the case to folks? Because it does take extra work. I've lived it firsthand. How do you make the case to folks that creating policies and business decisions that center people is a good thing?
Yeah. So this goes back to something, Venice, that you said, and also you, Dia, in terms of like HEB, thinking about how can we help people? We can help them by giving them a check, or we could help them by selling their products that benefits them and it benefits the organization. Like, how do you really center a best practice, and like, how is it a win-win for everyone? And so when we're working with CEOs at Future Forward Strategies, we're really thinking about how can data help in this aspect. Full disclosure, I sit on the board of a company called Arena Analytics, and what they help employers do is better understand who is in their workforce. Typically, when someone hires you, they hire you for what's on your resume. They don't know if you've been there for 2 or 3 years, if you've skilled up, if you went back to school, if you've gotten a certificate, if you have had children. They don't know how you've changed over the course of your tenure. And so I think that's where technology can help, and really allowing employers to understand who's in the room. When you think about when there's a vacancy, that's an opportunity to promote from within, right? That again helps with retention, it helps with satisfaction. But if we don't know who you are, if I don't know how you've changed over the last 5 years that we've worked together, then it's hard to know who's in the building. And so the employers that we are looking at are really thinking about the future work and practices. One, by starting with like, who are my employee bases? What are their lived realities, and what's most important to them? They'll tell you, but the data also shows, right? If you really look at it and take time. I love that you're on the research end. A lot of companies don't have a research person that's looking at this data on a regular basis, and that's really critical to make more of a personalized, like you said, it's not one size fits all.
Yeah, and from talking to Christina, they have a whole department of dozens of people involved in research. And so it really speaks to how employers are now making this not nice to have. It's an actual part of the work in order for us to succeed. Venice, how does this play out in a structural sense? How can an org approach converting all this people data, either qualitative or quantitative, into actually meeting those needs?
It goes back to what you were saying, really knowing your talent, really understanding people's aspirations, skills, what is it that they want to do next, not making assumptions. I loved how you said whenever there's a vacancy, that's an opportunity to grow someone or promote someone from within. And for us, we are asking our leaders to know everyone. Make sure that you're not just focused on the person that looks like you or that you're most comfortable with, but get to know each and every person in the organization. Get to know people deeper in the organization, not just those that maybe you have direct interaction with on a daily basis, but kind of click into your organization to really understand what it is that's going to help each and every one of the people in your organization grow and thrive. So knowing talent is a big one, which I think that's something that in the past it was maybe kind of surface, but now we don't want to be caught off guard or surprised when we start seeing women leaving the workforce or people of color leaving the workforce. We want to make sure we know them by name, where they have gaps, what can we do to help fill those gaps and make sure they're getting the development they need. The skills conversation that we had earlier spoke to me as a former teacher. All of our people want to come and do great work. They want to be valued. They want to be seen. And so whatever we can do as leaders to facilitate that, that's what we have to continue to focus on.
Right. It's sort of going beyond the icebreaker and maybe just,
That's right.
When was
That's
the last
right.
time you cried? Yes. Dia, same question for you. How are you converting this people data into meeting those needs?
Yeah, we talk to our partners all the time and hear from them, and on the level of actual policy, like we can talk about policy that we are working on, actually removing policies that inhibit greater success of our partners in our workforce. That's something that we're very passionate about. And a great example of that is we ask our partners, like, where are the friction points in the company that we can help resolve in order to make your work better, your life better at work. A good example is that as a lot of our store leaders, we're very frustrated that when we lose power, which happens a lot in Texas due to hurricanes, weather, ice, whatever, it could be windy today and we'll lose power. And that was very frustrating to them, because when we lose power, we lose food. And food is very difficult to restock a store, to resupply a store. How do we preserve food and perishables in our store for our customers to be able to have them? Because throwing away an entire 128 square feet worth of food is not fun to watch. So one thing that they really wanted to work on is how can we maintain power in our stores? And so that was a big policy issue, actual state policy issue that we were able to address during the last legislative session, that then turns into less friction for our store leaders, for our store partners, to have to worry about having to dispose of so much food, which actually happens quite often, can happen quite often, in a state that's very weather sensitive. So that's just one example of how we listen to our store leaders, we listen to our store partners, and try to resolve friction areas and break down barriers for them.
And it's super interesting because you didn't just take that data into internal solutions, and obviously your role exists, so it makes sense. You had to bring it outside, and you had to look at the legislative impacts that you could look at. Christina, I heard a little bit about this from our previous conversations. How does Slack use the data that you and your team are able to collect?
Yeah, there's a few things that I'll mention. I think, to your point, there is no one size fits all, and I think that's important to recognize. But we're really trying to embrace flexibility, both for where you work, but also for when. So schedule flexibility is actually much more important from the data. And so we think about things like team level agreements. Let's not pretend that there's going to be one policy across the company, but let's look at your individual team and figure out how you can work together. And so that's just, coming up with agreements for how we're going to collaborate and when are we going to collaborate. So we have things like core collaboration hours, which is sort of like, for some teams, it's something like 10 to 1 are the times where you're sort of expected to be working. Everything else is much more flexible, so you can do your deep work, you can take your kids to school if you need to, whatever you need to do, these are the hours where you're expected to work, but everything else is much more flexible. The other things that we've really experimented with are carving out more focus time. So we have 2 weeks every quarter that's called a maker week. This is no meeting week, and you just get to focus on deep work. And the data that we collect afterwards is, people love these weeks because they're able to get so much more work done. They're able to focus, and they're able to have more creative time. The last thing that I would say is we really try to promote asynchronous work. Not everything needs to be a meeting. And I think it's important that we always ask ourselves every day, does this need to be a meeting? And often the answer is no. And so what would it look like if that update was put in Slack, where you can read it when it's convenient for you? You don't have to be in the room, in the Zoom, whatever it is for that meeting. And I think that's an important thing to call out. And then finally, on the point about there's no one size fits all, we've really embraced a culture of experimentation. And so we're very quick to try things out. And if they work, great, we'll implement it. And if not, we will try something else. And I think it's easy when you come to a roadblock to want to like regress back to the old way. But really, it's just you need to try something different. And so really thinking about experimentation as part of your strategy, I think is really important.
Right, because some of the solutions that we're trying to look for don't even exist yet. And so there's no way to come to them unless we iterate and experiment and be okay with not being amazing the first time we try something. Exactly. Resonate with that heavily. I have a closing question for y'all. And I always like to end on an optimistic note, but I understand from many of the folks here, we are looking for ideas that many organizations may have tried in their work. We're not having to reinvent the wheel all the time. Sometimes we can lean on the successes of others. And so what I want to ask each of you, when has centering people paid off for you all? What is one example in your work where you were able to center people in it in some way? And how did it pay off? If we could start with Angela.
So I'm actually thinking about a company, Guild Education. I don't know if you know them, but they work with Fortune 500 companies to help bring upskilling and reskilling programs for mainly frontline employees so that they can get a 4-year degree or an advance their education. But one thing that they did that I thought was brilliant in working with them is that they heard from moms that one of the biggest issues that they have is childcare. No surprise to anyone. And so as they were founding and building the company, they created daycares on premise that worked with a sliding scale. So for those who made more, paid more. For those who made less, some of them don't pay at all. And so that's important, and that has worked well. And it's been one of the things that's helped them to actually retain people. Because one, they feel seen. It's high quality. They have an impact. Women can go down on their break and see their kids. It helps men. And so it's a small tweak that you think about that can have like a real outsized impact on the workforce. And those are the ones that I think a lot about when I'm like consulting with businesses. What are the small things that we could do that would mean a lot? And another organization is called COMPT, C-O-M-P-T. And I like them and I refer them to businesses I work with because they let employees decide what they want as their benefits. What's important to me, as a woman with a family and a daughter may not be important to someone who's 22 or 23. And so taking those dollars that you would allocate to benefits and letting someone personally decide how they want to spend them and what's best for them has like outsized dividends.
That's wonderful. Christina.
Yeah, I think one thing for me is, honestly, being in a room like this, we had an event a few weeks ago where we brought together executives from a bunch of Fortune 500 companies, and we all got together to talk about the future of work. And we were there, we were sharing ideas, we were sharing wins, we were sharing failures, and being surrounded by so many executives who are so passionate about making the future of work better than the past. I find that to be really inspiring, and I think we all have an opportunity to redesign the way forward, and that's what really motivates me.
Wonderful. Tia.
We often get asked how we do it. How does HEB constantly top, the best place to work list? I think it's the number one question we have, and I really think it's about hiring, the right people in the right position and empowering them to do their job and to do what's right for communities and for customers. I think that our workforce is so diverse. It is socioeconomically diverse. It is racially, ethnically diverse, all across the board. It's a real representation of Texas. And so we have to hire leaders who can connect with the entirety of that workforce, who are equally as diverse as our front line is, and also who can connect with the diversity of our consumers. HEB is one of the only grocery retailers in the nation who successfully has stores that cater to every segment of the population. A very, very diverse customer base, a diverse employee base, and a diverse leadership and executive team is really what makes it work for us.
Right. It speaks to the fact that representation for the sake of representation isn't enough. There's actually outcomes that come from folks feeling like they're represented in their leaders. Close this out, Venice.
I will. So when we ask our team members, what is it that kind of differentiates us? Time and time again, they come back to the culture. And even with all that we've been going through with the pandemic and everything that's happening in the world around us, I'm really, really proud of the sense of connection and community that we continue to build at the company. I feel, even when I ask people that have joined during the pandemic, so you think it's been about 2.5 years, so I asked people that joined maybe a year ago, and they constantly tell me, when I got here, I heard that the culture was really great, but it's even better than I expected. And these are people that had not experienced the way things were, or kind of going back to something. If they're experiencing it new. And so hearing that, it just really puts a smile on my face. We've got amazing executives and leaders who are committed. They walk the talk. We ask, do you feel what you've experienced is consistent with what you hear? And time again, we're very, very consistent. We're consistent on our culture code. We're consistent in our commitment back to our team members, making sure that they can achieve, career growth, that they're balanced, that they've got connection, that they can experience being included. So those are things that make me really proud, and I'm looking forward to figuring out how do we keep that going in the new world that we're living in.
Thank you, Venice, and thank you, the entire panel. I'm walking away with a sense that even though our challenges may be different in our various contexts, it seems like we're all on the same page that we got to do something. And so I'll now turn things back over to our co-founder and CEO, Emily Ramshaw, to close it out.
And before we close, we just like to thank again our founding sponsor, Indeed, our supporting sponsor, Notley, and our media partner, the Texas Tribune. Thank you all for making today possible. And finally, to our members in the room, we are so glad that you're here. We're so grateful for your support of our events and our journalism and our mission. If you are not already a member, this is my pitch, y'all. You need to become a member. You can do that by making a gift of any size at 19thnews.org/membership. One more quick thank you. They never put it in my script, but our events team and creative team is absolutely spectacular. So a big round of applause for them. And to those joining us virtually, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. We will see you all next time.